Okay, tonight's class is sponsored by Mrs. Shoshana Brody for her father's yahrzeit, which was today, the 25th of Nisan. Yosef B'Rav Gershon HaKohen. So the class is in his Aliyas and Neshama. It should be a good better for everybody. Okay, we're last time before Pesach, a while ago, it's like 5 weeks ago. We're learning the dinam of tzedakah. Okay, the mitzvah of tzedakah, which, as it says in Tanya, that whenever it says the word mitzvah throughout the Talmud Yerushalmi, it means the mitzvah of tzedakah, because tzedakah is a very important mitzvah. Chazal tell us tzedakah is equal to all mitzvahs. A person is obligated to give tzedakah based on their ability. We're learning basically the actual mitzvah of tzedakah is 10%, which is called ma'aser, and then you have chaimish, which is a fifth, which is preferable to give a fifth of the earnings to tzedakah. Even if somebody has nothing to give a poor person, you have nothing to give, nevertheless, the halacha is you're supposed to tell them a nice word, smile at the person, and at least that, to tell them something nice. Because if you scream at a person giving tzedakah, that you're giving tzedakah to, the Gemara says, the pasuk says, because they're down and out, Hashem listens to them, and it's not good for the person that's screaming at the poor people. Now, the last time we started, we were discussing tuition. Okay, can tuition be deducted from tzedakah money? I have to give ma'aser money. Am I allowed to give it from tuition from ma'aser money? So again, we just started it last time. So let me preface it and elaborate on where we left off last time. Anything which is an obligation for the person to do cannot be deducted from tzedakah money, from ma'aser money. For instance, you need to buy a pair of tefillin for yourself. You need to buy a lulav, a shofar, all those things, because you have a responsibility to do it. So you cannot deduct that money from tzedakah money. Now, you can't use ma'aser money, as it's called, for those obligations that you have. So now the question is, when it comes to tuition, teaching boys and girls Torah, there is an obligation upon the father to teach his sons Torah. There's a biblical mitzvah. A father has an obligation to teach his children Torah. As we mentioned last time, we mentioned the story last time when we were learning this, that the Alter Rebbe called in one of his chassidim, and he said, listen, you have an obligation to support your family. I have an obligation to teach my son Torah. Let's switch. You'll teach my son Torah, and I'll support your family. And the Alter Rebbe hired him to teach his son, who eventually became the Mitzvah Rebbe. So because there's an obligation on a parent to teach their children Torah, that's not deductible halachically from ma'aser money. Even girls, that there's no mitzvah to teach them Torah. There's no mitzvah to teach them Torah. Nevertheless, a father still has an obligation to make sure their children grow up to be proper Jews. So therefore, how do you do that today? By sending them to school. So therefore, even for a girl, definitely according to Alter Rebbe and even contemporary apostles like Moshe Feinstein, all these people say that you cannot deduct tuition from tzedakah money because you have an obligation to teach your daughters also to be religious Jews. Today, it comes from the school. They learn in school how to be a proper Jewish girl, and therefore, that's not deductible from tzedakah. There are ways, by the way, according to the Alter Rebbe, even if the kids are teenagers, where technically you might not have an obligation to support them, but nevertheless, Alter Rebbe says you still have an obligation to teach them Torah. So what could a person do? Everybody knows tuition is extremely, extremely high, and sometimes it's just impossible to do it in any other way. So there's certain, legal loopholes that poskim right you're able to do. Number one, if you make up with the school, then let's say tuition, for argument's sake, is $10,000 a year. You come to the school and say, listen, I'm going to give you the $10,000 a year. Let's make $5,000 tuition and $5,000 donation. So from the IRS, you're not going to be able to do anything about it. But technically, if I make up with the school accepts. I can't make up with the school $9,999 is donation, $1 tuition, because that's ridiculous. Nobody gets such scholarships. If there's a reasonable scholarship that a person might get, let's say they might be able to pay $4,000 as a scholarship. So then you can make up with the school. Listen, I'm giving you $10,000 in the tuition, but I'm counting $6,000 donation, $4,000 tuition. Then you can deduct the $6,000 from tzedakah money. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it, if a person really needs to, ideally this is not the way to do it, but if a person needs to, what they could do is the following. I pay your tuition and you pay my tuition. In other words, I'm not obligated to teach your child Torah. You're not obligated to teach my child Torah. So therefore, if I pay for your kid's tuition, so then it's not my obligation that I'm giving that as a donation to the school to help somebody else's kid learn Torah. And then you do the same thing, but you pay my tuition. That's another way of legally using tzedakah money to pay tuition. But again, it says in halacha that's only if a person really needs, and many people today do need that, and therefore they would be allowed to do that. By the way, if somebody buys tefillin for somebody else, let's say somebody either spiritually doesn't feel the importance of tefillin, and you say, you know what, I'll buy you a pair of tefillin and you put it on every day. So then the din is, that could be counted as tzedakah money. If I give somebody shmura matzah, that on their own they wouldn't do it, and I'm giving them shmura matzah for them to observe the mitzvah, so that money is all deductible from tzedakah money. Because, again, I'm doing it for somebody else. It's not my obligation. It's their obligation. I'm helping them with their obligation. And then it would be allowed. Technically, if somebody supports their children over the age of 6, technically, Besson forces parents to support the kids until the age of 6. Poskim right today, you have an obligation even later. Well, let's say parents are, let's say they're supporting married children, or people are supporting siblings, or people are supporting their parents. All of those, that money is completely tzedakah money. It's completely ma'aser money. In fact, according to halacha says your family comes first. Your family comes first. In fact, family comes before anybody else, before the poor people of your city, before the poor people of Eretz Yisrael. Why? The Torah says, you shouldn't conceal yourself from your own family. So therefore, if somebody supports their older children, even if they're not married, but they support them with clothing and food and apartments or whatever it may be, not tuition, not for learning Torah, not, we mentioned before, but for other things that could be counted as tzedakah money. If you support them that they should go, let's say you're paying their college tuition, that they should be able to learn a trade, so that could also be counted as tzedakah money, because again, you're helping them, you're giving them money that they should be able to stand on their own feet. In fact, in Shulchan Aruch it says the best level of tzedakah, in a practical sense, is if somebody is, so to speak, getting hurt in business, they're dying in business, and you get them back on their feet. by lending them money, giving them money that they can get back on their feet, there's no greater tzedakah than that. Why? Because then you're not only giving them money they're going to eat. Like the expression goes, if you give somebody fish, they'll have what to eat for a day. If you teach them how to fish, then they'll have a lot of money forever because they'll know how to get money. So all that is considered tzedakah money, and again, that could be counted from a person's ma'aseh tzedakah. Now, a person when they promise tzedakah.
Can I ask a question? What about a husband for a wife? If he pays the wife, is that tzedakah?
No, because a husband, believe it or not, the husband has a biblical obligation to support his wife.
Oh.
He's not giving you tzedakah. Okay. No, sorry. A husband has an obligation to support the wife, and therefore there's part of the dinim of the ksubah. She'edok susta ve'noso liyigna, the pasuk says in Mishpatim. That's a biblical obligation. Okay. Now, another important thing with tzedakah. Normally, in a business transaction, if I say I'm going to sell you something and I don't, that's fine. I mean, it's nice to keep your word, but there's no halachic obligation that because I said to you, I'm going to sell it to you, I have to sell it to you or give it to you as a gift, and so on and so forth. When somebody pledges money to tzedakah, the halacha is it becomes an obligation by verbally saying it. In fact, the Gemara's expression is, and the Rebbe used to tell them to announce it on Simchas Torah after they made the auctions for the Atar Races, the night of Simchas Torah, the day of Simchas Torah. The Rebbe said they should announce that what the Gemara says, Amirasi l'dvaya k'msirasi l'hedit. Saying, pledging something to Hegdish, to Hashem, or for that matter, tzedakah, is like I gave it over to somebody already. If I sell you something, I cannot change my mind once I sell it to you. If I give you a gift, you already got it, I'm not allowed to change my mind because it's yours. The same thing is by tzedakah. If a person pledges money to tzedakah, they have a halachic obligation, they can't change their pledge. And many times you have this, and this is a very complicated halachic issue. Many times people pledge money to tzedakah, to a certain institution, and then they get into a fight with the institution, and they don't want to give the money anymore. That's a big problem, because halachically you still have to give the money, because you pledged it to that institution. The same thing, by the way, and this happens also many, many times. If you have a tzedakah box with the name of an institution on it, according to halacha, you have to give the money to that institution. You can't say, oh, I don't want to give it to this yeshiva or this shul. I want to give it to a different yeshiva, a different shul. You're not allowed to, unless when you started putting money in that particular tzedakah pushka, you had in mind, I'm not giving it to this institution. I'm just using this as a box. But my intention is not to give tzedakah to that particular institution, then you could do it. And therefore, many times it's a big problem. Many times people have nameless pushkas, and they thought they were going to give it to one place and now they didn't. Or people are doing the tzedakah money, and money gets mixed up. Two pushkas get mixed up. So the din is, if two pushkas get mixed up, you have a big problem, because you can't just, halachically, what you really have to do, let's say there was $20 and both pushkas got mixed up, and between both of them there's $20. And you don't know which pushka was which. According to halacha, you have to give each pushka $20. Unless if you know for sure it was not more than 10 or 15 or whatever. So tzedakah is a very serious thing. It has a din of a neder, the din of a vow, and just like when you make a vow, you have to keep it. The same thing when you pledge money to tzedakah. In Shulchan Aruch it says, in Hilchos Tzedakah, that if a person pledges mentally I mean, they didn't verbally pledge the amount of tzedakah. A person comes along in his mind, pledges, think, okay, you know what, I'm going to give this place $100. Halachically, you don't have to give it, but in Shulchan Aruch it says the proper thing is to give the money to tzedakah. V'david emes b'lvavai, to speak truth in your heart. And the Gemara says that means if a person pledges in their mind, not verbally, mentally, to give something to tzedakah, they really should give it, even though, so to speak, halachically, they're not obligated to do that. The next thing is like this. The greatest level of tzedakah, we said, if somebody helps somebody that's falling, because as we all know, it's interesting, physical muscle they give for this. If somebody is tripping, it's easier to catch them that they shouldn't fall. Once they fall, it's much harder to pick them up. The same thing is in the concept of money with tzedakah. In tzedakah, you can have somebody falling, they're getting difficulties in business, and you catch them before they fall, versus somebody that lost all their money already and then you're trying to pick them up. It's a much more complicated thing. There's an interesting halacha question that applies to women, and that is, how much tzedakah is a woman allowed to give without her husband's permission? So halacha discusses that. They say they can't give money without a husband's permission, unless if it's a little bit of money that the wife knows the husband doesn't care, if she gives that money. Many poskim write today that women have their own money, and in many places, like in California, where there's what's called community property, so whatever they own is 50-50. So then many opinions say a woman can give as much tzedakah as she wants, because it's her money. It's not her husband's money that she's giving away. Nevertheless, it says in halacha, it's appropriate that a wife and a husband discuss between themselves, what they want to do for tzedakah, and they should make sure to give it in a proper way. Now, again, the Gemara also says the greatest level of tzedakah is when the giver doesn't know who's getting it and the receiver doesn't know who gave it. Okay, and the Gemara tells a few stories about this. One of the Amiroim of the Gemara would walk in the street and he would have a bag of money and he would walk facing straight forward and he would drop money out of his bag on the street and he'd never look back. And then the people would come, the poor people would come and they would pick up the money for tzedakah. The Gemara says that advantage was he didn't know who was getting it, but they knew who gave it. In fact, the Gemara tells a story, I think it was Mar Ukra, that he used to drop off money at a poor person's house every day. And the person wanted to know who is this gracious benefactor that's giving them the money. And they decided to chase them. So they were waiting by the door and they chased them. Mar Ukra ran away and he even ran into a fire. Not to embarrass the person, Hashem did a miracle, he wasn't burned. But he didn't want that the person should feel in any way, that bad about who knows who's giving it. And therefore the Mishnah says in Shkolim and different places that there was a tzedakah pushka, so to speak, in the Beis HaMikdash. It was called Lishchis Chashoy, the secret office, so to speak, the secret tzedakah box. People would just come anonymously and drop money in there, and poor people would come without anybody else seeing and take money from there. So it's actually the giver didn't know who took, and the taker didn't know who gave. Why is that something that should be done? So Allah says it's very simple. If I give somebody money and they know I gave it to them, down deep, we're still human beings. I think to myself, that guy owes me one. Look, I'm giving him tzedakah. He obviously, he has to appreciate me. So it's not 100% lishma. It's a little personal gain over here. The same thing if the person knows who gave it to them, again, they feel a little bit indebted to that person, even though the rich man doesn't know who took the money. So therefore, the best thing is in tzedakah, if it's possible, that people should give money without anybody knowing who gave it, and people should be able to take money without anybody knowing who took it, and that's the level of tzedakah. Now, what happens? Here's an interesting shayla. A person pledged money to tzedakah. He had a sick child, God forbid, and they said tzedakah al menashe yichya beni. He said like this. He makes a pledge to Hashem. I have my child is sick. If you make, he tells Hashem, if you make my child healthy, I will give $1,000 for tzedakah. He said condition clear. If my child gets healthy, Hashem, I'll give $1,000 tzedakah. And the child did not become healthy. He passed away. Halachically, he's potter, he doesn't have to pay the pledge because it was conditional. He said, if my son lives, I'll give you the money. He doesn't live, I'm not giving the money. So he didn't do anything wrong. He didn't, the pledge is like that. What happens though, if he gave collateral for the pushkin, he gave collateral for tzedakah and says, if my child gets healthy, you'll keep the collateral. If not, they want it back. Then the halacha he doesn't get it back because he already gave it. Once he gave it to tzedakah, it belongs to tzedakah, and he can't do anything with it. Okay, next is also a very important mitzvah, by the way. The Gemara says the expression ma'asin al hatzedakah. You force people to give tzedakah. In the times of the shtetl, or in the times of the Gemara and so wherever it may be, the Rabbanim would actually place taxes on the people based on their income or how much tzedakah they have to give. It says in the Gemara, brings it down about Mois Chitim, money people give before Pesach to the poor. In the time of the Gemara, in the time of the Shtetl, when there was a small community and the Rav was in charge of the community, and it's called Zion Tuvi Yair, the 7 elected officials, that was basically the city council, they actually put taxes on every person to how much money they're able to give, and based on that, they have to give it. So, there is a concept of ma'asin al tzedakah. They can force other people to give tzedakah. Now, what happens? There's some interesting shayla. They bring down a tshuva in Birkei Yosef, who was the chidah. A poor man came to the tzedakah people and said, if you don't give me a lot of money for tzedakah, I'm going to go work and desecrate Shabbos. He threatened them. Either give me a lot of tzedakah money or else I'm going to work on Shabbos. So the Chidah paskins, if there's no money, you don't have to give the guy extra. Just because he's threatened will be Machal Shabbos doesn't mean you have to give him the money. It's not your business what he does. You don't have to give him the money if there's no money, and that's it. Okay, another thing is you have to make sure about Talmidei Chachamim or the Gemara, the Poskim, right? People that are good people, people that do a lot of chesed and things like that. People have to make sure that they have their parnasa, that they do business with them, and make sure they have their parnasa. Another thing the Gemara says, and that is that a person should always do whatever is possible not to have to take tzedakah. Okay? In fact, the Gemara has an expression, Asay Shabbat chochel v'al titztarich lebrius. It's better to make your Shabbos meals into weekday meals. That means, number one, Shabbos eat 3 meals during the week, that would eat 2 meals. It says it's better not to take tzedakah and eat weekday food on Shabbos rather than to have to take tzedakah and eat a proper Shabbos meal. A person should do whatever is possible. And it says, even if it's a not a respectable job, but it's a job that makes money. You should do that job rather than having to take tzedakah from people. It's not a good thing. Then the Gemara says the opposite. What happens if somebody fools people and he doesn't need tzedakah, but he says, "Oh, I'm poor. Help me, help me, help me." The din is the Gemara says he will end up not dying without having to rely on people. If you're faking poverty, the Gemara says Hashem is not going to make you poor for faking it. Now, he says, what happens though if a person must take money from tzedakah and they don't? The Gemara says it's like you're spilling your own blood. So how are you going to live? You must have the money. It's like you're killing yourself. So ideally, a person should avoid taking tzedakah. But if they need tzedakah, they have an obligation to take tzedakah. And whoever is, so it's a very fine line to be able to separate between the two. There's one last very interesting thing. What happens if I went somewhere for Shabbos? I'm a person's a wealthy person. He comes somewhere for Shabbos, and after Shabbos, he needs to take taxi home, Uber home, subway home, bus home, whatever. Is he allowed to take tzedakah money from the pushka? Are you allowed to give him money from the pushka for him to go home with? And the interesting is that halacha is you are allowed to. The guy's a very wealthy man, but right now he's poor. Right now he needs the dollar for the subway, the bus, whatever. He needs the money and he doesn't have it. Halachically, he has a din of a poor person. To the extent, halachically, he doesn't even have to pay it back. I mean, it's proper if he's able to. The Gemara says he should pay it back. But technically, if somebody in this situation, that I'll give you another example. Guys in a shul and the meter maid is coming and it's 8:00 and they have to put money in the meter and they have no change upon themselves. Halachically, they could take a quarter from the pushka, put the money in the meter, and halachically they don't have to pay it back. Why? Because right now they're poor. Right now they don't have the money. Right now they don't have the money, so then it's not an issue. They're allowed to do it. Okay, we're going to stop here.